This episode is brought to you by Elevate OS, the only all-in-one community operating system. Elevate OS transforms property management, combining resident engagement, reservations, rent payments, maintenance, and concierge services into a single super app. It also uniquely integrates access control, intercoms, package lockers, and thermostats, eliminating app fatigue and redefining modern apartment living. Visit elevateos.com/MMN for a free demo and see how they can help you level up your operations. Welcome back to another episode of the Multifamily Collective. It is that time of the week again where we grab our favorite beverage. For me, it's Luckin Coffee. This is a Chinese coffee, espresso blend. I picked this up because I saw a story about Luckin and their grand ambition to really make a splash here in the United States and maybe displace Starbucks as our favorite place to go and get coffee. I know that's not everybody's favorite place, but all that being said, grab your favorite beverage, grab your favorite writing utensil. For me, it's the tall pen. And get ready. Speaking of beverage, we have Dom Beveridge back for another episode of the Multifamily Collective. Dom wrote a paper recently, and he released it at RETSI. There's actually a panel discussion about it at the conference, and the white paper is titled, "What Multifamily Residents Think About Wi-Fi, AI-Guided Sentiment Analysis." Now, we can take some time to focus on the survey itself, but to me, the real punchline here is the AI-guided or AI-driven sentiment analysis model or platform or process. If you think about traditional surveys and the way that they are administered, if you have a ranking scale on a 1 to 5 basis or 1 to 10 basis or whatever it is, you have 10 questions that you've authored. Many times you have your own bias in mind and what you want the outcome to be. So you'll author that into the questions, and you kind of get the feedback to validate what your thesis is from the start. AI-guided sentiment analysis, on the other hand, is much more dynamic, and the questions are really predicated on the responses of the people who are being surveyed. That, to me, was the most fascinating piece of this conversation. The findings in and of themselves, as it relates to Wi-Fi, are pretty exciting, and we'll unpack those. You want to take notes as it relates to those because there are some action items for operators out there that you can put in place today. But pay attention to those other conversations, the other conversation where he unpacks, Dom does, the model itself, the AI-driven or AI-guided sentiment analysis model. We get into the anatomy of that model and what it potentially means for the future of the multifamily space and implications for survey providers in the multifamily space, whether it be for resident satisfaction or for team member engagement or whatever it might be. There is some mild speculation about that. We don't get into that too deeply, but there are implications there that I think the industry will pay attention to, if not already paying attention to. And this survey and the results of this survey are a real good case study for what that might mean. So again, grab your favorite beverage. Again, for me, it's Luckin Coffee, and your favorite writing utensil and your favorite notebook, and get ready. Enjoy. Dom, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Yeah, I think we're on number 5, number 6, something like that.
Yeah, probably.
Well, it's always a thrill to talk to you. And I know I was on the road when your most recent white paper dropped, and I know you've since been on the stage at Optic, I believe, to unpack some of the findings in this particular white paper. But I'm going to flip the script a little bit and just ask you, what was the shocking point that you discovered in this white paper?
Well, the white paper does 2 things, right? It finds out information about what residents think about connectivity, like the Wi-Fi in their buildings, and it tests a brand new methodology for understanding sentiment, like using AI to understand what residents think about stuff. And I'm sure we'll get into that in a lot of detail. And if we went straight to what's probably the most momentous thing that we found about through this survey, is that there does appear to be a relationship between how good my Wi-Fi is and how likely I am to renew my lease. I find that an enormously momentous kind of thing, because just as somebody that spends all of his time talking to people about why they buy software and talking to vendors about what differentiates their stuff, I am the biggest, most hardened skeptic of any value proposition that says we impact renewal rates. Like I the minute somebody says we increase your retention rate, I tune out the rest of what they're saying, because it's so far outside of what you can possibly know about what your stuff does, right? But because we went through this methodology, which I'm sure we'll unpack in detail as we go through this conversation, we can tell that there is a point at which the Wi-Fi service in your building can get bad enough that you are highly likely not to renew your lease. That's the biggie.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you playing ball here and sort of releasing that big point to start. So let's back up to the beginning. There obviously was an impetus for putting this white paper together. You just disclosed the big finding, or one of the big findings. There were many findings in this here, but talk to us about what the impetus was.
Yeah, so this one has been way longer in the making than most of my projects are. We've been thinking about this in one way or another for more than a year. So I'll go back to OpTech of 2024, which is where this effort started to sort of crystallize. At that show, I was releasing a paper about multifamily connectivity. Right, it had started to really interest me through the 20 for 20 papers, the interviews that I had been doing. I started to notice that people were placing quite big bets on Wi-Fi. Right, it seemed like it was an expensive thing to put into properties, has very compelling ROI associated with it, but it's a big decision, and it's a very technical kind of decision how you do it. And so I started, over the last few years to go to conference sessions about where they were talking about Wi-Fi and connectivity. And I started to notice when I looked around the room, it's just a different audience was attending this stuff than attends the rest of the program at, OpTech or whatever technology conference it is. They were using different words to describe the same stuff. So it just felt like it was this very niche, but actually really big area of technology and multifamily, which made me think, okay, I think the people who read my stuff, the operations leaders, asset managers, even some technology leaders, I think there's an opportunity to lay out a common set of facts that you would want to understand if you were making an investment decision about this. So I reached out to Kevin Donnelly, 2 years ago or something. We got on board with this project of let's interview a load of people. Let's try and find out current sort of best practice and do a paper. And that's what we published at OpTech last year. Okay, so that was the background. As I was putting that paper together, I kept hearing this same set of facts coming from people who had invested, who were in the process of investing, companies that sell these systems, which is that we just don't know very much about what residents think about this stuff. You might spend $250,000 upgrading your property from standard retail Wi-Fi to a really, really good managed Wi-Fi network. And we know what differentiates those systems from one another. We know how they're technologically sort of different from one another. We know what different kinds of features they support in the building. But when an asset manager is underwriting the investment, they don't pay any attention to the quality of the experience, right? The amount of money that you're going to charge a resident for this managed Wi-Fi service is a property of the local market. Like, it's what are similar properties around here? What are they charging for a technology charge or for monthly Wi-Fi charge, whatever it is, and that effectively sets the price, right? So it's like, the local market is setting the price of the service that you're providing. From there, we work backwards into, how much revenue, how much NOI increase. Ultimately, what difference does this make to the valuation of its property? You then look at the costs of the different Wi-Fi networks that you could put into a building, and based on whether or not the deal pencils, you make your choice and you implement. Right, that's basically how it works.
That's
And
right.
it's like, but there's a purpose for all of this stuff, and it's about the services that you're providing to residents. And we just don't know very much about whether or not they even notice this stuff when you put it in the building.
That's right. And so it was interesting. So the way you frame the first paper is, hey, look, here are the things that you need to think about. Here's a roadmap, um, and a structure, call it, that you can go down, or a path you can go down. But what I hear you saying is there's a gap in there, and that gap is that we don't necessarily know what the consumer, the end user, thinks about the Wi-Fi service that is ultimately in the building. I can tell you from experience, having purchased buildings in the past, or not me personally, but working for companies that purchase buildings, uh, those developers, I want to stop short of saying they don't care, but they don't care. It's a math problem, right? And to your point, the quality suffers. So fast forward to today and the paper that you just authored. There's something that you did different this time around to actually fill that gap. Unpack that for us.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are good reasons why we don't know that much about this stuff. It's mostly because it's very hard to find out, right? So, if you think about 300 residents in a multifamily building, they don't like, we know they don't like it if their Wi-Fi doesn't work. We can probably intuit that they don't like it if it's too slow. You know, there's various things that feel like common sense, but how do you find out, for example, you know, if I think about these Wi-Fi networks, and I'm going to have to name check the sponsors here, companies like Dojo Networks and Gigstream and Ruckus are implementing are implementing these you know, these highly sort of differentiated technologies where, you know, instead of just having a modem in my unit, I've just got this network that follows me all around the building. It's my private network that's just mine. So if I go to the pool, if I'm going to the garage, if I'm on the roof, well, whatever it is that I'm doing, I have this uninterrupted service, which is great. I have you have things like cell assist, right? So a really good way of dealing with bad cell phone reception is that the Wi-Fi network picks up the cell phone signal around the building, so I never drop a call. I can get in the elevator and the call doesn't drop. I go in the most concrete dense part of the garage and my call doesn't drop. So, you know, it's all these these features that are like really, really good. How do you find out if somebody even notices that? Because you know, if I ask you the question, "Do you notice this thing?" Well, I've kind of telegraphed what I'm what I'm looking for, and the person who's answering my question is now thinking about this in a very different frame of mind from how they normally would. If you're asking people about something that's kind of important, but they may not think about it at all, or they may think about it a lot, you can't really get at that. You can't really understand what they think by just asking them survey questions, because you know the questions are going to be some kind of abstraction for most people. You're going to get lots of low quality information because you've asked people questions about stuff they don't care about. When you put a survey in front of somebody, you've already decided the form of all of the questions, and you've decided how they're going to answer it as well. So you're just sort of testing the resident on how they apply your logic to their feelings, right? Which is very, very suboptimal. So if you think about something like Wi-Fi, that's going to have a really broad spectrum of sentiment, you can't get at that information through any of the methodologies that we currently use. And so we decided AI to the rescue.
I love it. It came to mind, even the open narrative box in a traditional survey is just like, it's a moment in time and it goes unchallenged, right? So
Yes.
when you say AI to the rescue, I just instantly think, okay, if I put something in an open narrative box, or if I'm having a conversation with an AI, it's going to tease a little more out of my narrative. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I mean, I'll give you another bit of the sort of origin story of why I think this is immensely important for the industry, right? So, as you know, every year I interview 20 executives to figure out what they did in the last year and what they're working on for the next year. That's a very, very labor intensive process, right? You have to plan really carefully what you're going to do in 30 minutes with them. And you have to ask them open-ended questions, right? And the reason for that, the reason why I do that whole thing is that I know that in an industry like multifamily, there's no survey you could design that you could put in front of somebody that would get you anywhere close to the kind of information that you get through an open conversation. Because again, multifamily, you got this similar set of problems to the one we just described with residents and Wi-Fi, right? All of these companies are really, really different from one another. It's a very fragmented industry. Depending on what your business model is, you are going to have wildly different aspirations, options available to you. And unless you do this thing that you were just alluding to, right, where I'm going to ask you a question about, hey, have what AI projects did you roll out this year? If you've only got one opportunity to ask that, and I can't ask you a clarifying question, or I can't ask you why you did that, I'm going to miss most of what's important about your answer.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I want to take us down just a side street for a second, then we'll come back to the meat here. So when I read through this report and I got the punchline of an AI-driven sentiment analysis, fancy way of saying that the AI did the interview, I started to think about industries, right, that would be impacted. Like, I think about people who do surveys today for residents unrelated to Wi-Fi. Maybe Wi-Fi is in the questions, right? But we have some supplier partners that do surveys in the multifamily space that help us understand what resident engagement is like, what team member engagement is like, and so on and so forth. This kind of technology could really impact those industries. Is that right to think?
Oh, 100%, 100%. The power of open-ended questions is. I mean, I understand this because I've been doing this thing for years.
Yeah.
But if you can. If you can run conversations like that at scale, right? So rather than surveying people, if you actually interview them the way that a human would interview another human, you are going to find out vastly more information than any survey that you could ever put in front of them for reasons that we should definitely go into in more detail as we go through. But where we got on the train towards doing this particular project, the partner that I did this work with, ResiDesk, they're an AI, effectively like an AI concierge service that people use to sort of chat to their residents. But what I had started to notice about them over the last couple of years was that they had a brilliant way of handling sentiment. Like they were really figuring out how to mine data. Basically, the words that people use when they chat with this AI, they were figuring out ways to mine that into information about sentiment. They'd even been doing studies with various ownership groups to go evaluate projects that they were thinking of. The company that was thinking of converting part of its building into a work from home space in the post-COVID era. They used their AI to just go interview all the residents about what they thought about work from home, and what they found was nobody in the building wanted to. Lots of people were working from home, but nobody wanted to work with their neighbors. And so, but what we did want was better Wi-Fi. And when you started to look at the ability to uncover things like that, like if I put a survey in front of you that asked you about work from home facilities, you might just think like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's pretty good. I'll give it a 7 out of 10 or something, and you're going to say, great, 7 out of 10. This is going to make our property like much more appealing. But when you ask an open-ended question about what they want, they tell you, I don't want that. I want Wi-Fi. That's. So when you started to see things like that, it was just like, okay, maybe this Wi-Fi idea is a good guinea pig for something that has much broader importance in the industry.
So let's go a little deeper here. Let's call this the anatomy of an AI-driven sentiment analysis. And I read words I'd not necessarily heard before: anchoring questions and sub questions and things of that nature. Can you unpack the anatomy of a AI-driven sentiment analysis?
Yeah. So let's let's tee up a couple of the important things in this, right? So there are some really huge systematic flaws in the way that we currently do sentiment, right? So we mentioned earlier you're typically getting people to grade stuff on a scale,
Right.
which really limits how much you can find out about it. The other thing, though, that I hadn't really thought about until we started working through the actual data that this study yielded, is if I put a questionnaire with 10 questions in front of you, I'm making this implicit in some assumption that all of those 10 questions are equally interesting to you.
Right.
And the reality is they aren't. Like, you're going to be interested in 2 or 3 maybe things that I'm asking you, which means that if I'm asking you to answer, the expectation is that you're going to answer all of those 10 questions. That means most of the answers that you give are quite low quality. They're quite unreliable in what they're finding out from you. And there's not really any way to filter those out. So you've got a real signal versus noise problem. I mean, first of all, the problem with surveys is everything rides on whether or not you get the questions right? And that's a big if. Most of the time, I think most of the industry research I've read over the last 5 years, the main conclusion from it is they screwed up the questions. They used the wrong structure for responses. They framed the question the wrong way. They're asking about too many things at once. There's all kinds of flaws in the way that we ask questions. But basically, you've got the signal versus noise problem because I'm forcing you to answer questions that you're not interested in, and I'm forcing you to answer it on a scale. So, to the question that you were asking about anchor and follow-up questions, AI is smart enough to intuit from the way you answer a question whether it should ask you more questions or not. So, Mike, can I ask you a question about your Wi-Fi? Right, you're either not going to answer that, or you're going to answer it in a very curt kind of way, or you're going to say something that looks worth pursuing, and that's the structure that you're basically following. So the AI is asking you what it calls an anchor question, and the anchor question is basically the question that determines whether or not it should ask you more questions. And then it has a series of follow-up questions that it knows how to ask, depending, again, on how you answer each question. So you might get into a talk track on something like work from home, which is very consequential for connectivity. We're going to figure out from the anchor question whether or not that matters to you. And if it matters, we're going to keep asking you questions until it looks like it's time to stop. So what you've done by following that structure is, rather than having that problem where I'm going to ask you 10 things and assume they all mean the same to you, the AI is kind of going to let the respondent guide the AI to guide the conversation towards the area that matters to them. So you're following this principle of, if for our 2 out of 10 questions in a normal survey, what we're kind of saying is, I don't want to know about the 8 things. I want to know as much as possible about the 2 things that do matter. That's the sort of bias you're correcting through this. And so, through this combination of anchoring and following up, you get a much greater depth of insight into stuff that people actually care about.
Can I ask you one quick question on so when I go back to the early innings of chatbots, right? There was a path-based chatbot, so it kind of gave you these canned answers that I made up the answers for, right, to the questions. But what you're talking about is the AI kind of keys off of an answer, this narrative that I write, and then it goes, oh, well, based on whatever this is, I think this would be an interesting question. It sort of makes that up real time, right? It's not that I made up a question that's going to be a response to this particular response from the resident. Is that right? It's just...
Yeah, absolutely. So think about a conversation that you've had with, conversations you have with ChatGPT. But by the way, I was looking at this earlier today, like I think you could probably diagnose ADHD from just the sheer range of chats that I have going on with with ChatGPT. They're just all over that. But no, if you think about what it's like to have a chat with ChatGPT, where you get deeper and deeper into stuff, it's the same logic. What ResiDesk has done, it's the usual thing. There's some combination of large language and small language models that they use in their proprietary chat, but it works in a very similar way to something like ChatGPT.
Okay. So if you're we're going down the path of this conversation happening, real time responses are coming back. The insights that you can draw from these conversations versus insights that you might draw from this, let's call it a static version of a survey. There's probably a better way to phrase that, but what is more pronounced in this AI driven analysis than in this static analysis? And we can use this specifically.
Yeah. So so a good way to frame this is maybe through one of the findings that came out of the study, or one of the sets of findings that's written up in the white paper. Mm-hmm. People will just not talk at all about stuff that you would think was important. So again, because you're asking people to tell you what they think about this thing, rather than asking them to grade what you think about it, which is how surveys work. Mm-hmm. So a good example is for example, price. Right. So one of the things that I think is super interesting from this study, given that Wi-Fi is subject to like really tough like regulatory scrutiny, like people make stupid laws about what you can and can't do in terms of Wi-Fi because they really misunderstand how residents see this stuff, right? And so one of the biggest backdrops to Wi-Fi is that states and cities, legislatures keep passing laws that look like they're trying to regulate monopolistic practices in business, in buildings, right? So it's a really good idea for me to put really good Wi-Fi into the building that supports the lifestyle that people want, but it means that there's only going to be one provider of this stuff because only one company can run this network in my building. Well, your regulators come along and say, well, that sounds like a monopoly. And it's like, all right, so you want multiple different providers of inferior like service to be in the building. So yeah, that's this big backdrop to everything. And one of the things obviously that people talk about is price, right? So am I charging too much or too little for this service? Because again, the way that regulators tend to think about this is if you have one provider of this stuff, obviously they're going to abuse this position and charge too much money for this service, right? So price ends up having the salience. So if you were designing a survey to go find out about this stuff, one of the things you would definitely ask about is whether or not they thought this was good value for money, or whether or not they thought the price was too high. If you don't ask the question that way, if you get people to tell them what matters to you, you find that people do sometimes complain about price, but it's never about value for money. The thing they complain about is price changes, right? So you give them carte blanche to complain about whatever they want to. Everybody complains equally about just in terms of the number of times people complain about stuff. What's interesting is whether they like their Wi-Fi or whether they hate their Wi-Fi. The amount of complaints that they share is roughly similar, irrespective of if we look at statistically how many negative comments that you get, it's pretty much the same, irrespective of the service. What this analysis tells you is what really matters is what they complain about. Like the people who have good service complain about, well, there was this one time where I couldn't set my printer up, or that's some small thing that resolved itself, and it's really not consequential. Whereas if my service goes out, like I'm shopping aggressively for other solutions, I might even consider moving house over it. So you're able to uncover, whereas a survey would just tell you that people keep complaining about stuff. What this is able to tell you is that lots of these complaints just don't matter. But there are some that really, really do. And the thing with price why I think it's a really fascinating example is again, if you would put somebody a question about price, they would obviously tell you, well, it's too expensive, because that's what people do. If you don't ask the question that way, if you just ask them about what they think about their service, and you allow them to pursue whatever direction they do, nobody says that they think their Wi-Fi is too expensive. What they say is, I signed up to this, carrier deal, and I didn't realize that there was a price change after 6 months, and now I think it really sucks, and I want to find an alternative. That's the kind of stuff that you're able to find out.
That sort of keying off that, there was another interesting thing, and you sort of touched on this. It's the number of outages that I would tolerate before there's real action. Can you talk about that a little bit? And I think this was under the topic of churn.
Yeah. Well, it was the thing that we started off at the top of the show with. So again, I'm going to go back and explain a couple of things about how this works before I deliver the punchline.
The punchline, love it.
So we use a slightly flippant example in the paper of how surveys tend to deal with renewal decisions.
Yep.
Right. So if I think about if I'm trying to find out how people feel about stuff, what's the most important thing that I can really find out about this amenity? Like, happens to be Wi-Fi here, but it could be anything, right? It could be the clubhouse, could be the gym, could be any aspect of the community you could find out the same thing about. What people tend to ask in surveys is, does this thing affect your renewal decision? Right, you'll ask a question that's framed something like that. Mm-hmm. The problem is that's a crazy abstraction, right? You're trying in one question to gauge an attitude about two things that may or may not have anything to do with one another. And we use the example of, I think, dog washing facilities or something in the white paper, but we use that to just show there are potentially dozens of different ways that you could interpret that question that effectively mean, if I asked you a question about to what extent does your Wi-Fi affect your renewal decision, the most it could tell me is it would give me some kind of an indication of whether or not that was salient to residents, but it would tell me very, very little other than that. A much better way to do this, because you're talking about two unrelated things, right? Most people don't move house because of their Wi-Fi. Most people move house for other reasons. So a really good way to, or a much, much better way to figure this out is to separately understand how likely do I think this resident is to renew, and what do they think of their Wi-Fi. You treat them as two completely separate questions. Now the way we ran this, another important thing we didn't talk about, is that rather than, again, putting a one-shot survey that everything happens in the moment, this was a chat that ran over a 90-day period. So it had the opportunity to come back and ask you different things. It had the opportunity to pursue separate conversations. And what we did was we ran the renewal conversation separately from the Wi-Fi conversation. It also happened that we had enough good outcome data on renewal decisions that we were able to sort of calibrate the model that the AI was using to figure out renewal likelihood. So if you imagine what that means, we've now, out of these 30,000 residents that we interviewed, we've got cohorts that are relatively likely or relatively unlikely to renew. So we can separate people out based on where they are in terms of renewal probability. Okay, separately from that, we're asking them questions about Wi-Fi. Yeah. And what you're then looking for is patterns of correlation between the two. So what you're doing, so for example, if some complaint about Wi-Fi service correlates highly with the low probability set of renewal sets, that doesn't mean that people are not going to renew because of this thing. But if Wi-Fi is at the scene of the crime when people are highly likely not to renew, it's hard to not interpret that as a risk to your business. So correlation is not causation, but this correlation does probably matter in terms of the commercial outcomes for your building. So with all that in mind, and thinking back to that thing we talked about a few moments ago, everybody complains about stuff, but only a subset of the complaints actually matter.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that we found really, really matters is outages. So, and here's sort of one of my favorite general things, which is that gap between the way that vendors think about stuff and the way that their customers think about stuff, right? So vendors talk about, we have 99.9% uptime, right? They have these, these statistics that are, that are impressive, like, and important. But when you ask people questions about what they think about their Wi-Fi, and they take you down the path of reliability, residents talk about it in terms of frequency of outages. So they think about it in terms of, well, this went out once maybe this year, or it maybe goes out once a month, or so they sort of peg the number of outages to some time horizon that they can hold in their head, right? You can sort of imagine how you would answer questions like that. Well, it turns out that those things are fairly predictive of how unhappy outages are making them feel about being a resident in your community. Because what we found was, when you get the levels of complaints about Wi-Fi where outages are not implicated, when people complain about stuff other than outages, we see no difference in their renewal rates compared to the population overall. So I think the number was, it was 44% of people churn. So it's about 56%
right.
of people renew across this 30,000 unit sample. The people who complain about Wi-Fi renew people who complain about Wi-Fi but not outages renew at exactly the same rate as the population overall. But once you get to, it seems like if people think that the Wi-Fi goes out about once a month, you start to see a difference in renewal patterns. So there's a cohort that was where 58% of people churn rather than 44%. So it's more than 10% difference in the number of people who are unlikely to renew their lease, which is pretty consequential, especially in a market where there's a lot of inventory floating around. Well, if you get to the point where people think their Wi-Fi is failing, like on about a monthly basis, it looks like you're probably starting to see some meaningful impact on churn. And if it gets significantly higher than that, it gets towards the point where people say, well, every week something goes wrong with my Wi-Fi. We find that has an 83% churn rate. So again, we don't know, because again, we're not asking those questions together. So we don't know that the reason why I'm 83% likely to churn rather than 44% likely to churn is specifically because of my Wi-Fi. Mm-hmm. But if those two groups correlate highly with one another, people who complain about frequent outages and people who are really unlikely to renew, that's a real risk to your business.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. A couple of things come to mind there. One is that residents think about Wi-Fi as a utility until there's a problem. Then they think about it as an amenity. The other thing that came to mind for me was, I think that was in the report, was how there's a difference between retail or Wi-Fi internet and the managed stuff, and how those sentiment scores, I believe there's some wildly different churn rates related to those two dynamics, right? The managed versus the retail.
Yeah. Well, so we had to be, we had to sort of tiptoe around this finding because, again, we were very kindly sponsored by a group of managed Wi-Fi providers, but it does seem to be the case that nearly all of the highly dissatisfied residents are in buildings with retail Wi-Fi. So, there's multiple different providers, and it's up to the resident to go pick whether it's, I won't mention the names of the companies, but it's the familiar companies that you would use to provide Wi-Fi service. You're then beholden to their support, so that you don't have dedicated building support. You're just another household in their hundreds of millions of clients, right?
Right.
So you're beholden to their service, to their customer support, to the vagaries of their pricing plans, which I didn't realize this before we did the survey, but the pricing plans themselves are a source of dissatisfaction for the residents. So yeah, you do end up finding that the things that look consequential almost exclusively applied to people who are in buildings where there's multiple different Wi-Fi suppliers. Which again, if you think about that from the perspective of regulation, the stuff that we were talking about earlier, regulators think it's desirable to enforce multiple retail vendor environments on multifamily buildings. What this research is telling us is that all of the dissatisfaction, the serious dissatisfaction, the I might move house dissatisfaction, is associated with that thing that the regulators are trying to force on buildings.
Right. It's super interesting.
I mean, and the other thing, the other sort of corollary of that is that, you know, if this is something that you think is it represents a risk to your building, the problems that seem to be the most consequential are really the ones that managed Wi-Fi is designed to solve. So, you know, it's not like you know, that wasn't meant to be the punchline of this study, but it's kind of hard to miss it.
Yeah, definitely. It was interesting that it just came to mind that residents think about if a developer or an operator were thinking about things to do tomorrow. There was this interesting point about how consumers think in outcomes and how consumers' behavior has been really fine-tuned by all the advertisements that the big names are. To unpack that a little, I found that to be very interesting in terms of an action item that a operator might take.
Tomorrow. One of the most experienced guys in this area from one of the public REITs grabbed me in the security line at the airport when I was leaving Las Vegas to talk about this specific thing. It's really interesting. So. You sort of touched on this earlier, but the general finding, because we're trying to answer that question, you know, do people see this as a utility the way they see electricity, or do they see this as an amenity the way they might see, you know, the clubhouse or the gym or something like that in their building?
Sure.
As a sort of value add kind of thing. And the best answer to that question, based on the variety of answers that we've got, is it's a utility when it works the way residents want it to, and when it doesn't, it's an amenity. That's basically how it works. So things like speed, which is a big selling point, at least we think is a big selling point as far as, you know, managed Wi-Fi providers are concerned. Speed only matters when it's not fast enough. Yeah. So in terms of that thing, you know, trying to figure out what's consequential, the stuff we were talking about earlier, how much faster I am than the other services appears to be inconsequential in terms of how people think about Wi-Fi. If, you know, I have issues streaming movies or gaming or whatever it is that I'm doing in an apartment, you know, it really, really matters to me, right? So that's the way that we think about speed. But what we found is there's this aspirational kind of thing that people say when you get into the talk track about speed, and it's to do with fiber, right? So it seems that when when fiber comes up in the conversation in the talk track, people describe speed in this aspirational way where they use the same words that you also see in all of the advertising for fiber providers. And again, this is something you're never going to notice this if you're surveying people, but because, again, the AI, what we're doing here is just gathering words, like masses and masses and masses of words. And AI, as we know, is really good at tearing through masses of words and telling us what they mean. Well, one of the things you're able to find out is people start talking about things like, you know, gig speed and blazing fast internet, and do you know what I mean? And talking about fiber a lot. And the thing is, when you compare it side by side, if you look at the ad copy for, you know, Verizon Fios or Google Fiber or AT&T Fiber or all of these, it starts to look very obvious that if I'm aware of any of those ads which have these colossal ad budgets behind them, that really affects how I think Wi-Fi is supposed to work. And so what I was saying to the sponsors when we were going through these findings is, you might want to change your name to like Gigstream Fiber or like Ruckus Fiber, or like because like these, because you've got this wave that you can catch of these
That's right.
massive ad budgets, and what this research tells us is that the copy that those ad budgets are carrying is really, really breaking through to residents.
Right. So give them something they are already attuned to.
Yes,
So,
yes. If
so
that's how it's supposed to work, like, and again, it's the same thing benefit that you're really pushing if you're a managed Wi-Fi provider. So if we know that that's how people think about it, let's use those words to talk about it instead.
it's so true, and it's I know this is like more broadly speaking, consumer behavior is really sort of driven by Apple and Amazon and whoever, right? And so to the extent that you can start to speak in those terms and in that language, whether it be marketing or internal communicate, whatever it is, right? Just talk to people the way that big budgets talk to them, and you're potentially going to get the outcomes that you really desire.
Yeah.
I'm interested from your perspective, having gone through this exercise, and let's say it's a multi-year exercise with prongs everywhere. If an owner read this tonight, and you were advising them, is there just like one nugget where you'd go, hey, I'd really focus on that point. You should make that change in your organization, whether it be ground up development and they haven't started yet, or somebody that's operating today, something they could implement.
So you from this specific research?
Yeah, from this specific research. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would strongly recommend finding out what your residents think about this, and so we know exactly how to do this now. If you're on the fence, and lots of resident companies are on the fence as to whether it's better to just stick with retail, to go with having a single bulk supplier in my property, or going the whole enchilada and putting a managed network into my building. You can now find out about the salience of this service to your residents, and it's I would expect that it's to do with what they really feel about things like pricing, predictability of pricing, and reliability of the network. If you're really convinced that they're happy about that, then stick with what you've got. But if in a time when we're looking at higher vacancy rates in buildings than we've seen for a while, you really don't want to be one of those buildings that's carrying residents who are unhappy with this stuff, because it does turn out to be something that they have a low tolerance when it doesn't work. So yeah, I guess my thing is, don't let the external market tell you what your residents want. Just go find out. It's not that difficult to do now.
Yeah, it's becoming easier and easier. And that customer intelligence is driven by AI. Is just it's becoming easier and easier to harvest. I can't help but to think that if we're thinking down the road, and I know people like concrete things, but if we're speculating a little bit, in getting toward what we might label as a predictive model of property management, where everything sort of becomes predictive in nature and informed by AI. If you were to sort of vision high level what property management looks like 3 years from now, 5 years from now, what are the big thematics that you're thinking about?
Well, I mean, I think this is really cool. It's funny. I was doing a bunch of briefings with asset management about this paper just at Optech, and I was really conscious that, like, it was just putting a smile on my face, because it's just like, well, let's go find some stuff out. Well, it turns out there's all this cool stuff that you. So we're focused in this study on this one area of Wi-Fi, but there's nothing that matters that you couldn't really find out about in exactly the same way. And we have a lot of AI chatting to our residents, right? So
That's right.
I think the thing that people haven't fully grasped yet is if you break this paradigm of I want to class everybody on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of what they think about this thing, if you get away from that and you get into, it's like, I want to generate as many words as I possibly can about what my residents think of, and then I'm going to get AI to tell me what they mean. That you're just unlocking enormous potential in terms of how you improve experiences, how you improve capital allocation decisions. Ultimately, the more agentic AI gets,
Right.
the more it's using insights like these in real time to guide conversations, right? So if I'm having a chat with Mike about, his his blocked sync or something like that, and I know that that's relatively more or less salient in terms of something like a renewal decision, it might change the way that I prioritize that service request. It's either we'll be there right away, or it's, hey, is it okay if we access your apartment tomorrow? What time can we go? Do you know what I mean? If it understands more about the outcomes, it can react in real time and sort of guide things in a way that sort of maximizes your sort of positive sentiment about the property.
It strikes me that we're getting closer and closer to this. We've talked about this, who knows, let's say for the last 10 years. It's this customized or personalized service, right? And doing that at scale. It seems like now we're moving closer and closer to that point where we can actually do real customized and personalized service. And then that sentiment born out of that, right, being able to do that will give us real insights into the way that we design properties in the future, or experiences in the future for the residents who live in those properties, or even the people that work there, if there are people working there.
Yeah. I mean, imagine if you asked people before you installed that golf simulator.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. You may not do that.
Yeah. Well, exactly. So no, there's and it also just, that characteristic of figuring out what you want to talk about really changes the way that we frame things like research questions.
Yeah.
We were just sort of spitballing ideas about what other things would you want to find out about with this. Well, rather than sending people a questionnaire that asks them about their dishwasher and their fridge and that whatever it is in their unit, you can ask some really open-ended question about amenities and just get people to guide the conversation toward wherever it's going to go. And again, that's going to tell you much more about what actually matters. Again, if you're, we've seen the surveys where we're ranking, dishwasher, then garbage disposal. That these are the most important. It's like when you gave them a laundry list of stuff to check off. Sure, that's what they said, but you didn't discover whether this stuff is important or not. But you can discover that if you start with an open-ended question and you let them guide the conversation to what does matter to them.
It makes me think, even without a sort of a human catalyst in terms of the prompt, the services that they ask for on the property, whether it be to look at an apartment or they're turning in a service request or they're doing whatever, once this stuff is really facilitated at scale through an AI-driven process, right, consumers are going to start talking about the very things that, hey, I need my faucet fixed, and the AI is going to do that. They're going to triage it or whatever, but I'm going to have a conversation with them about that leak that, hey, by the way, happened 3 or 4 times, right? And so you're not even going to need, in some of those interactions, you're not going to need the human to even be the catalyst for those conversations.
That's right. And if you think about just one of the things that's sort of on my mind at the moment is, because I was thinking a lot about maintenance earlier this year. And it strikes me there's a property manager view of maintenance and there's an ownership view of maintenance, like a capital allocator view of maintenance. And the way I sort of think about it is, if I'm a property manager, this resident has a leaky roof, I have to fix the roof as quick as I can. That's the property management framing.
That's right.
The capital allocator framing is much more like, I have a lot of capital tied up in roofs. Am I addressing like issues with my roofs and maintaining my roofs in the most capital efficient way that I can? Well, that means you now want to know things like, well, how many leaks are there at this property? Is it more or less than it is at other properties? Then it leads you down the path towards, are we replacing things appropriately? Do we have the right suppliers? So when you start to find out lots of rich information about the things that residents talk to you about, you just increase the amount that you can know about the stuff that's driving the costs and ultimately your capital allocation across a portfolio of real estate.
Yeah, it's so deeply fascinating that, and I don't know, maybe this is cliche to say, but I think it's right now is one of the most exciting times to be in the multifamily industry, in the real estate industry, for the reasons that we've talked about today. Being able to get these deep and rich insights, and then ultimately make decisions. That I think one of the phrases that you used in the report was the commercial use, right? Or I think it was the commercial use of all this information, what it does for the commercial value of your community.
Yeah.
We're going to see a lot of that come to play.
Yeah. So it's service. So I don't know if you saw that Property Meld at their MX Summit, which I know Multifamily Media Network covered back in September. Ray Hespen, the CEO, shared this white paper he'd done where he was looking at the correlation between different maintenance, like different work order types, and renewal rates. And it's super interesting because, I mean, it's sort of intuitive, but it's really, really useful to have facts behind this. He found that if you segment out by when the work order occurs during a 12-month lease and what type of work it is, you find really big disparities in terms of the impact of this work order and its satisfactory completion on renewal rates. So, for example, I think it was in the first 90 days, if there's a problem with HVAC, toilet, or hot water, you have a much, much, much higher impact. If you don't deal with that in a satisfactory way, you vastly increase the likelihood that somebody's going to churn. Which is interesting. And in fact, the more sort of AI enabled stuff gets, the clearer it seems to be becoming that if it's something that you did that affects someone's decision to move out, it overwhelmingly happens during the early part of their lease, because the fact that I had a blocked toilet and it wasn't dealt with for a day or something like that affects how I see everything else about my landlord, right? It just changes the way that I see everything. And so, and again, if you sort of take that through to its logical conclusion, like we do things like we bonus maintenance teams on retention rates, right? That's pretty normal. But what we don't do is prioritize maintenance teams' work based on outcomes that are 9 months away.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that you're now working across silos, right? It's the leasing office and the maintenance team. All right, we can now see a cause and effect relationship. How are we going to organize ourselves differently? That's the kind of thing that I think is on its way.
You know what seems to, hopefully I articulate this well. I remember many years ago, I worked for an organization that hired one of the big consulting firms on the East Coast to come in and do sort of, hey, look at the business, make some recommendations of what we could do differently. And what was shocking to me and surprising to me is that nearly everything that they found at that point in time, almost everything, the ownership group and the property management group innately knew it. You kind of just knew it, right? And it's because of the time spent and the reps done in the business. You kind of just know this stuff. And what was profound, not profound, but maybe like striking to me is that, great, we know it in a different way, but we as an ownership group elect to continue to do little to nothing about it because we're trying to maximize the value of this community. We don't see that, right? And the returns on that investment are going to be many years down the road and so on and so forth. And so it makes me wonder, we're going to unearth all of these things. And then the real big punchline is, are we going to do meaningful things with that data?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think the friction of doing things with that data is getting lower and lower as we realize that, you know what, AI is really good at finding needles in haystacks.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is, I guess, what we kind of learned from this, from this whole study.
That's right. Okay, so before I give people a chance to, I think everybody knows you, so maybe that's a foregone conclusion. But is there anything that I didn't ask you that would be, or Fido there, thinks important for our audience to know?
Sorry, UPS just arrived.
No worries.
No, not really. I think we pretty much covered everything about the study.
Excellent. Well, Dom, it's always a pleasure, and I appreciate you investing a little bit of time with me. I know you're a busy guy and you're working on important stuff in the industry, but I appreciate you taking time out.
Yeah, well, thank you. And there's going to be lots more on this. I have another paper coming out in the next few weeks about that dives much deeper into automation that I've been working with Lease AI on. And of course, this is going to get a lot of airtime in the 20 for 20 conversations that are also about to start. Mm-hmm. So this general fusion of sentiment and agentic AI, I think, is the most fascinating thing in property management right now, and so I don't see myself leaving this for a while.
I love it. I love it. And I'd love to have you back again. I think you're like the one most frequent guest on MFC. So.
Very good. Very good.
Great. Well, thanks again, Dom. For everybody else, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.